Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I'm about to eat humble pie because humble pie was sometimes described as one of the first supergroups. And to understand this, you really need to understand how huge the Small Faces were, primarily in the UK and a few other markets. Now, the Small Faces were the breakout band of Steve Marriott, and they were revived under the name Faces, where Rod Stewart replaced Steve Marriott as the leading singer and figure of the band. And internationally, Faces with Rod Stewart were probably bigger, but in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, the Small Faces were really considered huge, and they sort of became ever more soulful as they went on, bringing people like P.P. Arnold, a very famous soul singer, into the mix and really doing some interesting stuff. But Steve Marriott was sort of a little bull of thunder, if you will, and he wanted to, rock harder. So he got with Peter Frampton, who was considered a sort of teen idol. He had sort of had several phases of being a teen idol, even though I think by the third he might have been in his 30s. But that's okay because Peter Frampton is one of the great guitar players of all time with such a sense of harmonics, of chords, of melody. I mean, when it comes to the chord shaping of Peter Frampton, he's one of the greatest musicians in the rock genre, period. Just really, really good. So he and Steve Marriott got together along with the bassist Greg Ridley and Jerry Shirley on the drums, and straight away they were very successful. They were a great live band and they recorded some really great records. Now, the final album with Frampton was called Rock On. And there's actually some good footage of the original lineup with Frampton doing an acoustic version of the Yardbirds For Your Love, which is just fantastic to hear them in that setting. But in 72, Frampton was replaced by another great guitar player, someone with a lot of sort of jazz fusion, with a jazz fusion background of the European style. And this was, of course, Clem Clemson, who had been playing with the wonderful UK fusion group Colosseum prior to joining. And I would say that if I had to pick a favorite Humble Pie album, it would actually be Smokin', which was the first record that they did with Clem Clemson in the lineup. Just great album from start to finish. Come On Everybody was a hit. 30 Days in the Hole was a really fun sing along. And they kept releasing great albums. The next year they released Eat It, which was wonderful album. Black Coffee, they did a cover of that, which was originally an Ike and Tina Turner song. Get Down to It, a great album opener. Thunderbox, which is a nickname for a toilet facility, was the 74 follow-up to that. Another really good album. And by the mid 70s, the writing was on the wall that they were going to break up. They did one final album with the second really of the two classic lineups, the first being the one with Frampton, the second being the one with Clen Clemson. And they released with a different lineup apart from Jerry Shirley, an album in 1980 called On to Victory. That was followed up by Go for the Throat, but that was more or less the end of the band. Now, Steve Marriott tragically died at a pretty young age. It was 1991. He was in his early 40s. He was exhausted after a long flight, fell asleep with a lit cigarette in his hand, and burned himself. And that was really sad. But the legacy of the band lives on because they were one of these bands that was sort of, rock and roll soul is how I would describe it. Frampton, of course, a very soulful, very harmonically aware guitar player, who was a great foil to Steve Marriott's straight ahead style. And Clem Clemson, from his sort of fusiony background, provided something similar. He would later go on to form a short-lived supergroup with Jack Bruce, David Sanchez, and Billy Cobham, doing some wonderful stuff at the beginning of the 80s. And it just worked really, really well. And they brought in the mid 70s the Blackberries, a group of three female BVs backing vocalists who really added a great sound, sort of really made it a kind of vocal wall of sound, if you will. I think that the legacy of Humble Pie is assured, but I don't know how many young people remember them the way that they might remember other bands of that era, the Creams, the Led Zeppelins, the Black Sabbaths. And I asked myself why Humble Pie isn't remembered as much, and it seems that for young people, music that's sort of straight ahead rocking with a soul influence is increasingly less popular. Metal, because it had a subculture surrounding it, and because it was born out of an alternative scene that survived. And so the sort of primogenitors to the metal movement, people like your Uriah Heeps, your Zeppelins, your Sabbaths, your Purples, those bands still have some name recognition among young people. But the more straight ahead, soulful, blues based rock, your Humble Pies, your Bad Companies, I'm not sure if the young generation knows them, but it's the kind of music where if you were to put it on at a street party or at a dance or at some other event, everyone would get up and dance to it. And if you look at some of the live video of Humble Pie in their prime, and you see just how dynamic and exciting a sweat-covered Steve Marriott was, he got the crowd to move. So if you haven't checked out Humble Pie or haven't checked them out in a while, do check them out. You'll be dancing and grooving sooner than you think. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.